VUCA environment, one of the key things, and this is what we're going to talk about for a little bit, is really ensuring that we have a sense of, when we're thinking about adaptive leadership, really understanding that it relies on a leader's changing his or her zone. So for a moment, we're going to talk about what those zones are. If you look at the very first zone, it's the comfort zone. It's sort of where we sometimes as leaders lean a little bit more into when it comes to being in a VUCA environment. That's the reason we're here, to help you stretch and exercise that muscle as it relates to being an adaptable leader. So a few things come to mind when you're thinking about the comfort zone. It's that mentality, or that frame that barely survives in VUCA. Ooh, if I can just get through this, I'll be okay. Barely surviving. Immediately going to the problems manager. Okay, what can we do? Let's deal with the problems. Let's jump on the problems. What are the issues that are coming up? It's repetitive. You know, this is the way we've always done it, and we've been successful, so we're not going to try to do anything else because we just need to keep it going. So we've always done it this way, we're going to keep it going and continue to do it this way. Whether it's effective or not, it's just the way we've always done it. It's siloed. Okay, we're going to do this, and we're going to do this together. No, we don't need to talk to this people, or we don't need to go over here and join this starship. We're just going to focus on what we do and try to be successful with it. And then it's also having a restrictive view, not looking at the whole, not thinking about the whole. Very, very restrictive in the view. It's directive. Let's do this, let's do this, let's do that, and then we can move on. Risk adverse. Nope, we don't want to try anything new. We're just going to kind of keep going with the status quo and figure out where we go from there. And then very technical solutions. Not looking again at other things that may need to be considered. When we talk about the adaptive zone, sort of flipping and quite the exact opposite. Thriving in VUCA. So really thriving, still continuing to do well, and being resilient even if things don't quite go the way I want them to. Disruptor. Instead of, okay, I'm going to solve the problem, okay, what do we need to think about differently? Really disrupting things. Innovator. Really looking and saying, how can we do this differently? What's new? What's fresh that we need to consider? An influencer. Systems thinker versus looking only at my little part of the world, looking at the whole, thinking systems-wide. The learner, we hit on that, really being open to hear and learn. A risk taker. And then lastly, looking at adaptive solutions. How can we do this differently? So really changing the way we think and do. Changing out of the comfort zone and moving into the adaptive zone. That's the direction that we're headed. That's what we're trying to move to as leaders, as we're looking at and considering this notion of adaptive leadership this week. So, the bigger question is, how do we do this? How do we get there? What do some of those behaviors look like? And we've talked about some, and actually you came up with some during the after action review. And so we're going to hit on some of these and talk a little bit about these together. But before we do that, we need to understand what are some of the foundations of an adaptive leader. So there's some foundational things, even before we get to the behaviors, that need to be considered. So these have to be the given. First and foremost, positive intent. Really considering that, okay, I have positive intent in what I'm bringing, and then sort of that piece of I have to believe that someone's not trying to set me up, so there's positive intent in that, right? So really looking at that, there's positive intent going on. Second, humility and vulnerability. Sometimes those are words no one likes to hear. Being humble and being vulnerable. can be uncomfortable. How many of you just love to be vulnerable? Raise your hand. Right? Yeah, not one of those things that, everybody, maybe there's a few that says, okay, yeah, I don't mind being vulnerable. But a lot of times it sort of puts you out there, right? It exposes you. But in order to be effective adaptive leader, part of that is, that foundational piece is that humility piece and being vulnerable. And then trust. We heard that. We heard some of that when you talked a bit about meeting with your alien life form members and coming together. You felt, okay, I at least was able to break down a little bit of a wall because I had a conversation. Stephen M.R. Covey wrote a book called The Speed of Trust. How many of you have read that or seen that? Okay, so some of you, and he has an equation that says when trust is high and speed, let me pull my notes out. I want to make sure I say this right to you guys. He says when trust is high and speed is high, cost is low. So these are the economics of trust. When trust is high and speed is high, cost is low. The other side of trust is when trust is low and speed is low, what is cost? High, right. So there's economics of trust. And that's what he talks about in his book, the fact that trust is not just something that, it's a really nice, touchy-feely thing to do. It's something that's critical if we're going to be effective as leaders. We want to make sure that whatever we're doing, we're looking at how do I build that trust with my peers, with my team, and that sort of thing, because there is an economics to trust. So considering when you're thinking about trust, how do I build that? What can I do? Is it easy stuff like sitting down and having a cup of coffee? Hearing that vulnerable, humble part is a critical part of it. What do I need to do to build trust? Then, the willingness to learn. We keep hitting on this whole learning thing. The willingness to learn is critical in terms of foundation of adaptive leader. Service leadership. I heard some of you talk about that a little bit earlier today, as well as accountability. Service leadership, that's that, how can I help? What is it that I can do? Maybe I need to roll up my sleeves and help in this situation. How can I help? And then being accountable, not only to yourself, but also holding others accountable that are around you. And then last but not least, and I said this earlier, that whole element of resilience. Being able to bounce back, even if things aren't quite going the way you want them to go. It can be uncomfortable if they're not going, and you want to get frustrated and throw in the towel, but really the foundations of an adaptive leader is willing to say, okay, let me step up to the plate again and again and again and keep going. So it's being resilient. So without these in place, the behaviors that we're going to talk about right now sort of could crumble from the top. So let's talk about what are the behaviors of an adaptive leader. And again, some of these we talked a bit about earlier. So first and foremost, having an adaptable mindset, right? Really shifting and thinking differently about things, even if it's sort of outside of our wheelhouse or outside of our comfort level, really adjusting and shifting and adjusting. Empowering others. What does that mean exactly, empowering others? What does that mean? We hear it all the time.
Well, partially it means giving up some of your own control and ceding it to someone else.
Yeah, kind of giving up that control. I'm going to hold on to this because I know it, and sometimes maybe because I know it, I'm a little bit more comfortable doing it and giving someone else an opportunity. Now, certainly that doesn't mean that I'm just going to give it to you and walk away, right? That means that I'm going to give you an opportunity, but then also leave the open. If you need help, come and see me. Let's talk about it. I'm going to have some checkpoints to make sure you're okay. But really, that empowering others is critical, especially if you're in a VUCA environment. You've got to trust that they're going to do what they need to get done. It does come down to trust. Fail fast, learn even faster. What does that mean? Yes. I'll come right to you.
Okay,
You were going to say?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. So it's failing, but then also learning from that, right? So one is, okay, I'm going to fail, but then let's talk about what do we learn from this and what can we do differently? How can we do things differently based on what we learned in this moment? So really taking that opportunity.
It's part of taking the risk also.
Oh, certainly. Are taking the risk also. Absolutely. Thriving in the in-between. Thriving in the in-between. Really, that gets back to that resiliency that I talked about earlier. It's the ability to say, wow, you know, I think of this, and I love boxing. I don't look like a violent woman. I'm not, actually, but you know, one of the things that's amazing to me is their constant, the blows that they kind of sometimes take, but they're still very resilient because they have an end goal. They have an end goal to win the championship or whatever it is. But it's that mindset of, okay, you know what? I'm going to keep going, even if it's uncomfortable, even if it doesn't feel really good at this moment. I'm going to continue going on. Focusing on the outcomes. What was the outcome this morning? Save the sun, right? You know, and sometimes in a buchan environment, when things are going like this, we look, hello, thank you for saying that. We lose our focus, right? Because it's going like this. You're like, wait a minute, there's something we're supposed to be doing. Oh, save the sun. And then we go back to it, wait a minute, and we keep, this just keeps going and we lose it. Yeah. So it's important to kind of consider is that, okay, am I always focusing on the outcomes? And then being transparent. Being willing to kind of lay it all on the line and say, even if I'm the leader at the Starship, or I'm the leader at my team, being willing to be transparent and say, you know, you guys, I think this is a tough, you know, work that we're doing, but we've got to get it done, so I'm going to need your help too. So really, that gets back to that humility and being vulnerable, being willing to be transparent. And then organizing around data and information flow. What does that mean? What does that mean to you? Yes.
You gotta know what problems you're solving, the best way to do that is.
Yeah. Yeah, so looking at what are we trying to solve, what's the problem we're trying to solve, and what's the best way to do that? How do we organize it in such a way where it makes sense? And then, the thing I love next is creating and validating feedback loops. It's real easy for us to create the feedback loops and make sure we get this and make sure everybody gets the information they need, but sometimes we miss that big piece of validating. Wait a minute, is this right? Are we doing this in the right way? Is everybody doing the same thing? Are we following our own processes? Are we doing what we said we would do? We can forget that sometimes. And then last but not least, demonstrating and receiving candor. Easier said than done? Is it easy to demonstrate candor? Not necessarily. For some it is. For some, they're pretty direct and can say, well, listen, I don't like the way you did that, and they can go on with it. For some, it's not as comfortable. And then the other side is, how many of you like to get criticism about something you're doing? Raise your hand. Yeah, okay. Couple of you. Well, I'll talk to you afterwards. No, I'm joking. No, but most human beings, it's kind of that funny feeling of getting that feedback that we don't necessarily want to hear. But being an effective, adaptive leader, that's a behavior and a muscle that we've really got to work out and make sure that we're giving it our all in terms of that. So these are the behaviors. Is this everything? No. But this is a great start and something that we will ask you to consider as we're going throughout the week and looking at adaptive leadership. Now, we just talked about thriving in a VUCA environment. And I love this picture because it kind of really gives you the context of thinking about something, someone thriving. And thriving is critical when you're thinking about adaptive leadership. It's something that's really important. Being resilient and keep on going and keep on growing in spite of in a VUCA environment. That's critical. But equally as critical is this notion of being a disruptor. Being willing to ask the questions, the hard questions. Why are we doing it? What can we do differently? How can we change this? Really being the influencer of change when you're thinking about being a disruptor. You need both. There's no versus. You need both in order to be effective adaptive leaders. So being willing to push it a little bit and ask the questions, even in an environment that seems a little bit like this. Being willing to say, wait, can we take a moment? Let's figure out, are we doing the right thing? Are our feedback loops working? Are we doing what we said we would do? Being willing to ask those questions, even if it's an uncomfortable situation that you're in, even in a movement environment. Now, we talked a lot about the behaviors. So now we're going to talk real specifically about that book that I had you pick up, Taking Smart Risks. Because this really is the crux, and you talked a lot about it during your after action review with Ivan. You talked a lot about risk and examining risk and what that means to you. And now we're going to talk about really examining your own relationship with risk. How your relationship with risk affects you, your work, and those around you. Really, that's the crux, is an opportunity for you to grow and develop and build your adaptive leadership skills by understanding, okay, what's my relationship with risk and what do I need to do differently? How do I need to think about this thing differently as it relates to risk? Now, before we continue, one of the things I'll say up front is obviously we're not talking about situations that will have a negative impact on compliance or safety. The HR person in me says the legal regulations, we have laws we have to follow. So we're not talking about, I'm going to risk and I'm just going to hire only women and they have to be 5 feet tall like Lynne. That's what we're going to do, right? Yeah, no, there's legal regulations that we have and things that we have to consider. But also, you'll realize that risk comes in all shapes and sizes. So it's not just risk on the financial impact. There are other things that risk are engaged in. So really considering that as we're talking about risk. So here's what's going to happen. We're going to give you an adaptive leadership challenge. We promise you that throughout this week, you will have an adaptive leadership challenge. So this is your first one, your first official one. You are going to be charged to get in your alien life form groups, and you're going to create an 8-minute max presentation with 2 key deliverables. First and foremost, you're going to explore and explain takeaways and learnings from your assigned section. That's the first thing you're going to do. So explore and explain what are the key takeaways from your assigned section. And then the second thing you're going to do is you're going to have 2 team members give narratives on how the section changed their overall relationship with risk. In other words, how it impacted them. They're going to talk about what shifts in mindset did they gain from reviewing that information. Any action items for them back at their work. What's the takeaway that they're going to apply back in their work environment? Or the realization of why a past situation turned out as it did. It may go, oh, I understand now how I responded and what impact that made on me. So those are the 2, excuse me there, sir. Those are the 2 key deliverables that I'm going to ask you to do with this assignment. Now, here's an interesting thing. I'll give you an example. A dear old friend of mine read this book, and he's a senior citizen. So it was really very impactful because they were, senior and really kind of reading this book and trying to understand it, and had a tough business situation that they were dealing with. And one of the things that they explained to me is reading this book and going through it helped them to really think about how they were handling their business situation from a legal perspective, and they made a shift. And they made some decisions that possibly they wouldn't have made before had they not read the book. So that's what I'm going to ask you to consider in your business environment with your assigned topic. What is it that potentially I need to think differently about if there's a situation that I'm in? Or what is it that perhaps I need to do differently back in the work environment as it relates to risk? So real quick, what I'm gonna ask you to do is, and here's a tip, in your book, there's a section that says ideas and tools for action, and there is a chapter summary. I will encourage you to go there and use that information. And here are your assignments for your groups. Citronians, you're going to do part 1, reframing risks. Trilogues, part 2, find something worth fighting for. Starstatians, part 3, see the future now. Pulsars, part 4, act fast, learn fast. Empacos, part 5, communicate powerfully. And Portas, part 6, create a small risk culture. So those are the areas that you will be zeroing and focusing in on with your alien life form groups. Remember, you're going to have a visual of some sort, PowerPoint, something like that. Now, the thing I will encourage you not to do, in fact, I will say do not do it, is use a flip chart. It just does not work in this environment, okay? Now, here's the thing. I'm going to dismiss you shortly. You will have a couple hours to do this, and we will come right back together at 4:15 for you to give your presentation, okay? So we will encourage you to make sure you go right, and I'm going to tell you where to go in a second, right to your area and meet with your group and strategize and come up with your presentation for your particular section of the book. Shane, anything else we need to share as it relates to this? Or
Just
yes.
one thing.
Yes.
If you're going to have a visual, like on a laptop, we have only HDMI cables. So if you have like a Mac like me and you don't have an HDMI adapter, that won't work, okay? So just make sure you realize if you're gonna present something up on the slide, you can do so. You just need HDMI capability.
Thank you. Thank you. All right. So, but,
One question, so when we speak about laptops, that basically means go get your own.
yes, you would need your own laptop. That was the question. Do you need? Yes, you would need your own. Okay. All right. So here's where what you need to be aware of. All week we have assigned you a team room for your alien life form group. You have a team room all week, and it's in Croton Hall. So here we go. Portas, you are going to be in 31. Empacos in 32 through 33. Pulsars, you will be in 35. Starstatians, you will be in 41 through 42. Trilogues in 43 through 44. And Citronians, you will be in 46 through 47. Those are your team rooms for the entire week. As we're going through our adaptive challenges, that's a resource team room for you. You have been assigned to it. So please, please, please use that as a resource. Now I'm going to ask you to stand. You will go immediately to your team rooms, and then we will come right back together at 4:15 to hear your presentations. All righty? Your first adaptive challenge, do well. We look forward to see what you come up with. See you later.
Involving them a little bit more probably would help you know. Just because a lot of what it is are things as opposed to very ignorant stuff. We were asking.
We can use all this stuff in the paper, right?
Absolutely. Yes, sir. Absolutely. Yeah, I would just say that's the reason.
So how do I do that? Maybe that's the question. You say I have no problem doing this, and I feel like I have a lot to go through. How do you?
Yes. I'm sorry? Yes, you certainly can. Yep.
How do you do it? And you have an hour with how I see what I need. Because normally, what I would have loved to do is maybe one or two and have them kind of talk about it and come back together and have that conversation. But I opted to just go around and pick ones that I would ask them questions or second meeting. But I just, how do you do that? How will knowing that you need to
2:15.
But I thought the last thing you said, yeah, get them
Oh,
out
okay,
of
all right.
That was,
Yeah, it's difficult because number one, when you're going through, I'm just using the 9 blocker as an
Yeah.
example, you're going through the 9 blocker, you can't give them table time, but you can include them in your conversation a bit more, I think. I
Okay.
think that that's what you were sensing, because a lot of what we have, we end up doing a whole bunch of just lecture,
Yeah.
as opposed to periodically getting them involved. Not at the end.
Yeah.
You started to get them at the very end. You really start to pull them in at the very end, but I mean, the time is what it is. You're right, but at the same time, I thought it was pretty straightforward with the lecture piece. You had points that you wanted to make that I think you didn't make, that were good points you made.
Yeah.
Because now, how can I curate, get them involved too? So, nope.
Yeah.
And plus, again, as I